Hey everybody, it is Coach Malcolm back with another endgame lesson video, and today the topic is going to be queen versus pawn endgames. And you might be asking yourself, doesn't a queen always just defeat a pawn in the endgame? And while that is true, most of the time the queen will obviously be able to win against the pawn because she is just a much more powerful and stronger piece. But in certain positions, especially when the pawn is on the 7th rank, it is possible for black to get a draw. Not all, but certain positions. So today we're going to be looking at how black can try and get a draw when its pawn is on the 7th rank, and we're going to be going through every single file, A through H, and determining what happens. So first, we're starting with the B file because it is one of the simplest. So I want you to take a few seconds, analyze the position, tell me if you think black has any chance of drawing, and if you don't, how can white win this position? So let's take a second or two to think about that. All right, so this is indeed a win for white. And the strategy here is that we obviously cannot let this pawn promote, because then we'll have a king-queen versus king-queen endgame, which will be a draw 99 out of 100 times. And so what we have to do instead is we have to force this king to go in front of his pawn and then move our king in. So the way we do that is we would start with a move like queen a6, and the king's only option is to head to b1. And now he's in front of his pawn. He has stuck that pawn there, so we take the time to move our king in. When the black king gets out of the way, we can't move our king again because then he'll promote. So what we do is we force that king back to b1. And the way we do that is we have to make it a move like queen c3. We have to make it so that black has no choice to go to b1, because in this position, white attacks both b2 and c1. So the black king, if he goes to d1, we will obviously take, and this will be an easy win. So his only choice is to go to b1. We will move our king in again, and again we'll see this strategy used. Queen b3 check, king a1, queen a3, attacking the pawn and the king at the same time. The only way for him to defend it is to play king b1, and we move our king in again, and now queen takes b2, and queen d2 is checkmate. So when that pawn is on the b file, it is a win for white. Now let's look again. This is the g file. It's going to be very, very similar. We have to force this king to g1 so that the pawn cannot move, and then we bring our king in. So we play queen f4, king e2, queen e4, king f1, queen f3. This is the same formation, attacking the king, attacking the pawn. The king is forced to go to g1, and again we will move our king in. And we could keep going through this. The king will not have many options. He will keep being forced on to g1 and eventually lose this game. Queen takes g2 is checkmate. So you'll notice the same strategy was used when the pawn was on the B file and the pawn was on the G file. And these are what are called corresponding files. So the A file corresponds to the H file. They're both on the sides of the board. The B file corresponds to the G file because they're both the second file, and so on and so forth. So C corresponds to F, D corresponds to E. So going forward, we should understand that corresponding files, when the pawn is on the 7th rank and the king is there, next with that pawn, the result will be the same. So it was a win on the B file, and it is a win on the G file as well. So now let's take a look at the E file. So take 3 seconds or so to calculate the same thing. Can black draw here? And if not, how do we win as white? All right, hopefully we determined that it's the same thing as the B file and the G file. So this queen will move on over to D3. The king is forced to E1, and white gets to bring their king in and eventually deliver checkmate. So again, this same strategy used over and over again, forcing the king in front of his pawn and then bringing our king in. And again, E corresponds to D. So when we have that pawn on the D file, we will see the exact same type of maneuver being utilized, attacking that king, attacking that pawn. The king is forced to d1, and again we have our simple checkmate. Queen f2 is checkmate. All right, so just to reiterate, the B file, the D file, the E file, and the G file are all wins for white as we force that king in front of the pawn. Now let's look at something a little bit trickier. So now the pawn is on the A file. Why does this matter? Because the king has a lot less options. He doesn't have another file on the side to run to, because these outside files, the A file and the H file, have only one adjacent file next to them. So keeping that in mind, see if that helps you understand why black actually does have a chance to draw this position here. So we'll take a few seconds. All right, so hopefully we figured out. After white tries the same strategy of forcing that king on a1, queen b4. Now if the king moves to a1, white cannot play a move like king c4 because this is a stalemate. This pawn doesn't have any moves and the king doesn't have any moves too because the queen is guarding the b file. So let's say the queen tried to continue to check that king. If she did this same sort of formation, attacking the pawn and the king, again, he gets to run to the a file. This is a stalemate. And if that queen kept trying to check the king, we would find that they would just keep on going in circles because there is no real way to stop this king from again eventually putting himself on the a file in front of his own pawn and stalemating himself. And this will just go on a continuous loop and end up being a draw. Unless this white king is closer to the position and closer to this king. So why? Let's take 5 seconds or so to calculate why in this position white can win. All right, hopefully we see this very neat move, king d3. And it looks crazy because we're allowing this pawn to promote on a1 into a queen. But here, hopefully you saw queen c2 is a checkmate. And if this king decided to move something like queen b2, we have another checkmate here. Queen c3, if the king goes to b1, queen c2 check, king a1, and queen c1 is checkmate again. So our king being close enough allows our queen to get to c2 and deliver checkmate, or get to c2 and then deliver checkmate on c1. So normally, like our previous position, it will be a draw because the king is stalemated unless this king is close enough to help out and be a helping hand. And it's the same situation if this king is on b4, he will move to b3. After that pawn promotes to a queen, queen c2 will be checkmate as well. So just to reiterate, this pawn is on the h file. It corresponds to the a file. Here, the king is not close enough, unfortunately. So after a move like queen g4, again, this is our classic. Black puts himself in stalemate position. Now, let's look at our most confusing example, which is when the pawn is on the c file or the f file. So I want to take a few seconds or so, calculate why, if white can have a win here or if black is able to manage a draw. All right, so this is a draw. Black is able to manage a draw in this position, and that is because when this queen moves to b3, attacks the pawn, we would hope our opponents play a move like c1 and trapping themselves in front of the pawn, and then we would have our same strategy of bringing our king over. But unfortunately, that is not what would happen because after queen b3, black has this super sneaky move, king a1, and now it looks like they are sacrificing their pawn. But once we take, this is a classic stalemate position, and black has managed a draw. So we can't take on c2, and if we continue to give checks, this king will stay with his pawn, threaten to promote, but always once we play queen b3, he will run back to a1, and there's no getting around this. Similarly to the a file stalemate, black will just continue to go in a circle and avoid losing his pawn and just urge white to try and get this stalemate. So this will be evidently be a draw. And again, unless that this white king is close enough to help out in this position. So why is this situation any different, I ask? And this situation is different because the white is again closest to the pawn like we have with the position on the a file. So let's take a few seconds, consider why this is important. All right, so here white can win because after a move king b3, again, we allow this pawn to promote, but we have this super neat queen e4 check. If the queen goes to c2, she will obviously be lost. Queen a2 will be checkmate. So if the king does his only remaining move, king to a1, we have a super cool mate into the queen checks back to a8, king b1, and then queen a2 will be checkmate. So C corresponds to F. So when the king is on the F file, again, this is going to be another draw, unfortunately, because once the queen goes to G3, the king will go to H1 and force himself into stalemate. But like we saw in the previous position, when our king is close enough, we have a way to checkmate with this move, king b3, and coming to e4. Okay, so to reiterate, right? When this pawn is on the A file or the H file, the king is able to stalemate himself in that corner on A1. When the pawn's on the C file or F file, the king is able to again stalemate him in the corner on A1 or H1, and those positions are only going to be able to be won by white if this king is super close to the position, so he's able to come in to usually B3 or G3 and deliver checkmate. And then if black's pawn is on the B file, the D file, the E file, or the G file, is an easy win. We force that king in front of the pawn, and then we move our king in slowly and checkmate. So I hope you learned something about these sort of tricky endgames in some positions, and that we will use these in our own game. Okay, thank you, everybody. I will see you guys later.